Hello, you're watching Tell It Like It Is, and my name is Kathy Benuck. And first up today is this. Happy New Year. I hope you have a wonderful 2014. And the other thing I hope today is that we'll soon get a wave of warm weather and get out of this frigid cold. Do you agree with me on both? Anyway, on December 18th, we taped a show that was titled Pinocchio Theories on Common Core. And it was actually our sixth show on this huge subject, this educational debate that's going on, and a debate that, quite frankly, is going to go on for a long time longer. My guests on that show were three people who not only have a lot of knowledge on Common Core, but have really become recognized, I would go so far as to say nationwide, and have developed an awful lot of respect for their involvement in both education and in educational issues. And those three folks were Anne-Marie Banfield, Sid S, Glassner, and Jon DiPietro. Now, on that show, we got into a lot of the issues that surround Common Core, such as just how superior are the Common Core standards? Are they really internationally benchmarked, as the Common Core advocates claim? Is Common Core really a collaboration, as advocates claim, of people from throughout the United States, teachers, and parents who got together on it, or is that totally untrue? Is smarter balanced testing the way that we should be testing our kids now as to how they're learning? How much information is being gathered on not only kids, but on their families as well? Where's this information going? How easy will it be to get for insurance companies, for employers, for gosh knows who else? Maybe anybody who can easily punch into a database because they're very computer savvy. And, you know, a big question about Common Core is, with Common Core, are we going to see local control of education become as obsolete as things like typewriters and four-party telephone lines? Some of our younger viewers will have no idea what I mean by a four-party telephone line. Ask your parent, or definitely ask your grandparent. They'll tell you. And it wasn't that long ago they were available. We also talked about how nationally, and unfortunately even locally, there's this little parade of self-appointed, and I want to emphasize the words self-appointed, experts on education, who now, as a means of promoting and defending Common Core, denigrate the international true experts who say Common Core has problems, and who basically now run around indicating that anybody who has questions or objections about Common Core, it's only because they're basically kind of unintelligent. I guess I'm a real dummy because I keep asking questions. And they also kind of define people who may oppose Common Core for any reason as simply being malcontents who want to destroy public education. You know, ridiculous and pathetic arguments, and they're going to have to do a whole lot better than that. Anyway, if you didn't see that Pinocchio show or the other 5 shows on Common Core, I'll ask you to please watch them. It's an important subject. You can do it on the show website at www.tellitlikeItisnh.com. On the top toolbar, click on Issues 2, and then you will see a drop-down menu, and there'll be Common Core on that, and voila, all Common Core shows will be on there, including this one and future ones. Now, I know that there are people sitting in the audience at home watching this who are saying, why does she keep doing shows on Common Core? I know you're out there, especially if you don't have kids in the school system, or don't have kids at all, or basically if you're, you know, overall pretty satisfied with public education in your town, whether it's this town or another town. Well, I'm going to say this to you. We'll keep covering it for as long as it takes, because Common Core is the biggest educational experiment that has ever been foisted on the American public. It is right now rolling down the tracks at 1,000 miles per hour, despite the fact that there are hundreds of unknown answers to questions that are validly being asked about it. It's really a frightening example of big government interfering in people's lives. And quite frankly, it is going to cost us, we the taxpayers, billions of dollars whether or not it turns out to be a total disaster. That fact alone should make anybody who has a sane mind worry about Common Core and ask questions about it. And it should make you want to demand real answers to all those questions that right now are being ignored or are being summarily dismissed. Well, today we have another show, and I'm very delighted that we're going to continue the discussion with Anne-Marie, with Sid, and with Jon. They're back. We're going to carry on from where we are. And today's show we will name, so that you can differentiate it, today we're going to call it Detusking the Common Core Elephant. Hang on to your chairs, everybody. Happy New Year to all of you. I can't believe the holidays are over and we're back. And everybody dressed warm today, and Anne-Marie and I didn't even talk about both wearing green, but here we are.
There you go.
Well, you know, there's one thing I want to throw out just to get the discussion rolling, and I know you're all bursting with ideas. And I have it right here. This kind of just, oh, I thought I had it right here. I sort of had it right here. This just came out, actually, see what happens when I do a lot of notes? Every so often I foul up and I don't know what I do with them. Here we go. This news just came out, well, at least it just came out to me within the past few days, that it actually was in the news on December 20th. You've all heard of the Cardinal Newman Society, which is a nationwide, very prestigious organization of Catholic educators at every level of education. And they issued a statement on December 20th that I think is fascinating, and I'll quote it. "We have grave concerns. This school reform effort is nothing short of a revolution in how education is provided, relying on a technocratic, top-down approach to setting national standards that, despite claims to the contrary, will drive curricula, teaching text, and the content of standardized tests. At its heart, the Common Core is a woefully inadequate set of standards, and that it limits the understanding of education to a utilitarian readiness for work mentality." I have a feeling you'll all have something to say about that statement.
I don't think there's anything else that needs to be said. I think that is probably one of the best quotes that you will ever read about Common Core standards. I think it covers everything. Absolutely.
Well, it also echoes what a lot of other Catholic institutions have been saying. There's a Bishops' Council that had another statement which is very similar to that. But everyone that's come out, and there have been a number of them in the last 2 or 3 months, and I've collected them, and they all echo the same kind of sentiment. They're not in favor at all. They don't want it. They don't want any part of it.
And these are educators from all over the country.
Oh, yeah.
Who Common Core kind of came as a surprise to, despite the proponents saying, oh, this is a collaboration from everybody.
I think what they touch on also, and I think that this is something that really hasn't been discussed when discussing Common Core, is how education is being redesigned, and they touch on that when they talk about the utilitarianism for workforce. And that's really the redesigning of public education right now. It includes the Common Core standards, but it includes competencies, which we're seeing in the high schools right now in New Hampshire, which is workforce preparation, workforce skills. This is a rehashing of other reforms that we've seen in states in the past. School to work was one of those. And so this is now going nationwide. And so if you really look at what that statement says, they're saying that they do not support this because of that agenda, because where public education is going. So this is not just about a set of standards. This is about transforming a liberal arts public education system into workforce development. And what does that mean? What does that mean for our schools? And that really hasn't been debated publicly. It's just been thrust upon our education system with no debate, no talk about it. And if you really want to know the blueprint, you would have to go to Mark Tucker's letter to Hillary Clinton, because they tried this back when the Clintons were in office. And like I said, they did try it in some states. You're going to see I'm looking for studies that show that this even improved academic achievement. It doesn't. It shifts focus from academic excellence to these workforce so-called skills. And I don't want to go too far into this because I don't want to take away from the show, but I'm just going to give you a problem that I heard from a math teacher one time, a math teacher in high school, who said, Anne-Marie, here's what I have to do in my math class. Instead of teaching my kids math now, I have to teach them how to collaborate, because that's one of the workforce skills that he's supposed to now infuse into his classroom with these kids. So they have to collaborate now. So he's going to have to take away from actually teaching the academic content in his math class. And we already have a problem with math education in this country anyway. So now he's further having to say, now I have to work on these so-called skills that somebody came up with, and you know, there's a history to that. But this is what's happening. We are now going to make this workforce development public education system versus an academic liberal arts education, where the state kind of guides kids through the system and says, you know, here's the jobs of the future. But do they really know what those jobs of the future are? And are they going to become obsolete someday? And so, you know, we discussed earlier before going on the program, I've always felt like the focus in public education should be on literacy. Because if those jobs ever do become obsolete in the future, you're going to have to shift. You're going to have to shift sometimes from, and we're seeing it right now because of the jobs that are not out there. If you have a literate individual who's 35 years old now looking for another job, they're in a better position than somebody who might have had workforce skills, but maybe did not have the literacy skills to take them to a different career path. So that needs to be debated, and that really hasn't been.
I would like to, before we really get into a lot of the meat, you mentioned Mark Tucker, and his name came up briefly in our previous show. And he is the same person that was paraded before New Hampshire legislators just a couple of months ago as one of the so-called experts on Common Core. Tell people who Mark Tucker is. Let's talk a little bit about his background and how much of an educational expert he is.
He doesn't have any. He's a lighting man. He started his career with doing lighting. I think it was in theater or something like that. He was in theater. And I tried to find out how he wove this into education. I wasn't quite sure. I didn't see the connection, but he certainly has no educational background. He doesn't come from an education. He didn't teach.
And yet he's all over the country.
Right.
Speaking on it.
And he made a couple of associations with other people, and I think he wrote a couple of books that I made sure that I didn't read, so I can't really tell you what's in them. But
and what was his tie to the Clintons?
Well, he has this. He wants to transform the public education into workforce development, which is what you'll see in Germany. This is kind of like the German model that he wants to incorporate into the.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, and you can read it for yourself. I'm not saying anything that you can't go on the internet and read. It's Mark Tucker, M-A-R-C. Not M-A-R-K. And it's a letter to Hillary, and it spells out the cradle-to-grave plan that he wants for our kids. Now, this is an individual who now is, tried to push it during the Clinton administration, but at the time, it seemed like we had some resistance. You know, there was resistance to this kind of public takeover in education. And moving it from a liberal arts where, you know, you are educated and then you get to decide what career path or where you want to go in life. Not everybody goes into business. You're going to have stay-at-home mothers. You're going to, you know, stay-at-home mothers and people who need, you know, maybe I go in a career path that takes me into law, but I still need maybe to be educated in finance. So when I go to buy a house, I can look at, you know, papers that I'm signing and understand what they mean. So even if you're being educated towards the workforce, which is what he wants to do, there's other areas that you really need a solid foundation in literacy on in order to become a productive citizen. History, U.S. history, the history of the world. If C.S. Lewis has written a lot on this, why we need a liberal arts education. And Bill Gates, one of the biggest funders of Common Core, does not see a need for liberal arts education. Actually, it was Steve Jobs and Bill Gates who debated this, and Steve Jobs said, yes, we do need a liberal arts education, and we need that literacy foundation because we don't want to make the mistakes that we've made in the past as far as history. So our kids need to be well educated in history, and let's face it, they're not. I mean, You know, you
That's
know.
proven time and time again when you'll
Yes.
see different news people go
Right.
out on the street.
Exactly.
And on many networks, and they'll ask people questions about
Exactly.
things that are happening right now, and
Exactly.
people are kind of like, duh.
Yeah,
You know,
and
they
so
have no idea.
that's the shift that we're seeing coming down the pike that has never been discussed. You know, everybody wants to say, look at the standards, look at the standards, and that is important. But we need to look at it from a big picture point. And what the Cardinal Newman Society did is they looked at what does this really mean. This is not just a set of standards. If it were, I don't think we'd see the uproar against Common Core, because it's a fundamental shift in public education. That's what's driving this outrage and this movement against Common Core, because I think it was just a set of standards that they said, you know what, here's a set of mediocre standards. If you want them, go ahead and incorporate them. If you want to improve on them, you would not see this kind of pushback. The reason you're seeing the pushback is there's so much more in addition to the standards. There's teacher evaluations that are now tied to the tests.
Now, we heard them say on this, not our show, but on another show on this station, claiming that, you know, that's not true. But yet, to my understanding, the state of New Hampshire did sign that teacher evaluations will be tied into the kids' test results.
They have to be.
But they sat
me, they
right
have-
in the chairs that we're sitting in, saying, "Oh well, not in New Hampshire.
Well, you
They
have
have
to.
to
You'll
be.
still
That's
have
why
local control."
When they got their waiver to get down to Common Core, one of the things they have to agree with is that the testing is part of the teacher evaluation.
Well, to me, that was deliberate misinformation being given out to people.
Well, that was one of the things we touched on in the last show, I think, was talking
Yeah.
about this whack-a-mole
Yeah, a little bit,
game,
yeah.
where you've got, you know, the three-headed monster of, monster's probably an unfortunate term, but you've got the standards, you've got the curriculum, curricula, and you have the assessments. And so whenever you have a discussion about any one of those things, they're able to shift the conversation. So if you're talking about the standards, then they'll say, well, that's part of the assessment. You know, we only want to talk. Common Core is just a set of standards. But then if you try to shift the conversation to the standards, they say, well, that's part of the assessment. And it's a shell game where you're always bouncing around between the standards, the curricula, and the assessments. And I think one of the dangers that I see is there is a direct connection between the standards and the assessment, which also means that it's going to drive the curricula.
Yeah.
It has to. You
It
know,
has to.
you've got the same people and the same organizations and the same companies who are putting the standards together are also putting the assessments together. So, therefore, what's going to drive the curricula? The assessments. And they're also the same companies that are putting together the teaching guides and the study guides and the
Okay.
textbooks.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say there are not pure hands involved.
No.
Right,
There are
and-
too many ties between too many factions that, in my opinion, aren't real healthy.
Right, and you don't get an unbiased, independent, kind of clear picture
Yeah,
on
yeah.
proficiency of your kids when you look at a textbook and it's test prep because they're making the test. There's no clear independent. You know, I've always told parents, if you really want to know if your child is proficient, get them tested outside the school system. Get them tested outside the school system, because there are too many variables going on in the school system that's not going to give you a clear picture. And we know that. We know that when we compare the standardized test that's given in the state compared to the national test, there's a difference in proficiency levels. So if you really want to know if your child knows math, get them tested outside the school system.
Well, you know, we're talking about standards and curriculum, and of course the proponents always say, you know, totally different. The standards won't dictate curriculum. What do you say to that?
Standards do. You can't escape it. There's a lot. Understand, there's a lot of fraud here. There's a lot of deceit, a lot of deception going on, and Anne Marie and John hit on some of it already. And so did you at the beginning, when you talked about people who disagree with the Common Core. They're looked upon as maybe being a little kooky, that why aren't they doing this? Well, what we're missing in the conversation, as Anne Marie brought up, is the fact that we have to educate people to be skeptics. We don't have enough healthy skepticism in the population of people to come forward and be able to say Why are we doing this?
That's
I
a
agree
great
with
point,
you.
Sid. I was actually going to bring that up when Anne-Marie was talking
agree with
about the collaboration skill.
Yeah,
To me, that's a euphemism for conformity.
exactly.
They're teaching kids to conform, which is
Yeah.
discouraging
That's exact-
them from that healthy skepticism
That's
that
right.
you're talking about.
And,
That's right.
also
And we
we
can all
need to-
see where all the inability for the skepticism has
Well,
led us
right.
now.
And we
in,
talked
in all
about-
kinds of arenas,
Right.
particularly the political arena.
That's right.
Yeah, and what Anne-Marie was talking about before was really, if I can put it into 2 words, it's a corporate agenda. It's what they do. What they want to turn our kids into is cogs, little cogs. Place them in there, fit them in the corporate picture, and that's where we'll be comfortable. Put them in there so that they don't ask questions, they don't understand democracy,
Scary.
they're not skeptical, they're not inquisitive.
They wouldn't be
Well,
future
they-
guests until it like it is, would
That's
they?
right.
No, and
But that's what we're doing.
I was fascinated by Anne-Marie's comments about Microsoft versus, or Steve Jobs
yes.
versus Bill Gates, which I immediately made the connection between Microsoft, the company, and Apple, the company, and just think about the difference between the two. Both very successful companies, but they did it in very, very different ways. Apple was very innovative and creative in what they did, and let's face it, Microsoft pretty much stole, or borrowed, or bought, everything that they did. Apple stole some of it too. We can't, despite Steve Jobs's objections, the truth is that he stole some of that stuff too. He would probably use the word he was inspired. But you just think of the difference in the way of the corporate cultures between the two companies, and it makes a lot of sense to me when you see the fingerprints on Common Core, and I just think that to your point about cogs, the future. There's a book I read a year or so ago by Seth Godin called Lynchpin, and he talked. I don't know if you've ever read that book.
I saw part of it. I read parts of
Right.
it.
So that was one of the things that he talked about in the book was
Right.
that the Industrial Revolution. A lot of the education system we have now is a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution because we had that shift from an agrarian economy into an industrial one, and they needed workers with certain skill sets, and so we need an education system for that. And to Sid's point, what those types of businesses needed were cogs, replaceable cogs, people with similar if not identical skill sets, so that if one cog broke or got lost or you just wanted to get rid of it, you just replace it with another cog. The problem with that is as we move into the information age and a much more service-oriented and an economy that is going to be much more reliant on innovation and creativity, cogs don't cut it. Cogs are not going to be. We all know that intuitively, right? I mean, I don't think anybody is under the illusion that they are going to graduate in 2013 or 2014 with a college degree, get a job, work there 40 years, retire with a golden watch and a nice
that's a
pension
thing of the
plan.
past. That's like the dinosaur now.
Yeah, I mean, we're turning into a freelance economy. Well, despite the fact that I saw some disturbing numbers to the contrary for last year in terms of the number of people who are self-employed, but that's a completely different show. But we need a workforce that is not one that knows how to conform or wants to conform, but that has that liberal arts education, that is has much greater capacity for creative thinking, for independence, and this is coming from somebody, by the way. If we'd had this conversation 5 or 6 years ago, this is not the point of view I had. I've changed a lot. I mean, I am a math and science geek, have an electrical engineering degree, and for much of my life, I poo-pooed the liberal arts aspect of things. I didn't place as much emphasis on literature or even history, for that matter. Part of the reason was I was not very good at history. I have a terrible memory. But I've done a complete 180 on that now. You know, part of it, I think, is, you know, my own life lessons. But as I said, the other part is I also recognize a really significant shift in the skills that I think somebody needs to be successful for the next couple of decades. I think it's very different than what we've had. And it's, my opinion, it's a back to the future. You know, think back to, we need the types of educations that Thomas Jefferson had. You know, think of those minds and you know, the raw materials that they were working with. You know, that I think that's what we need today.
You know, on that score, and I can't help but think of people like my grandmothers, whom, of course, now are deceased because they'd be well over 100 years old. And, you know, people of that vintage, most of them didn't get high school because they had to go to work, whether it was on a farm or if they were in the cities and the factories or whatever. And yet, they were so literate.
Yes.
Their handwriting was beautiful. They were well read. They could spell. They could do math. They knew history. A lot of them were multilingual. They were able to keep up with everything. They worked. They were able to learn their jobs. And this was, you know, sometimes with less than even an 8th grade education.
That's
now you have
yeah.
people graduating from prestigious universities who, when they open their mouths, your ears almost fall off because they don't even know how to talk correctly.
That's because back then there was a grammar school. There was a foundation of knowledge that a child had to have in order to move on and to graduate. And now what we've seen is we've seen a shift. There is this shift into analysis. There's a lot of analysis going on in even the lower grades, and that's why some of the cognitive psychologists have come out and said that these Common Core standards are inappropriate because there's so much analysis and abstract thinking that they want the kids to do. Well, you can't do that unless you give them a foundation of knowledge. We can analyze things when we know it well. That's when we, you know, if you have a surgeon, you go to the top surgeon if you want to have surgery because they can do an analysis, they can figure out, because they have the knowledge. And what we've done is we've said, you know what, we're not going to really focus on that knowledge. I've gone to meetings in this state where superintendents have gotten up in front of the parents and said, we're going to de-emphasize knowledge. They've said it. And I've sat there as a parent thinking, you've got to be kidding me. I've went to...
Did people get up and question?
I questioned it. I questioned it because I'm appalled.
Yeah.
We already have a de-emphasis of knowledge. According to Common Core at a meeting I went to at Pinkerton Academy, they're going to de-emphasize knowledge. That's part of Common Core. That's the problem. We can do the analysis as we get older, as students get older, but we've got to put that foundation in. And that's what's missing, and that's what... you know, when Common Core came out, I was hoping that, you know, in some way we would go back to what you had described, where it was called arithmetic. It's not called arithmetic anymore. Where it was grammar school. It's not grammar school anymore because kids don't know grammar. I mean, I can't tell you how many teachers told me they're not teaching. We just don't teach it anymore. You don't teach grammar. That is the foundation of writing. How do you write legibly if you don't know the foundations of grammar? So those are the things that I was hoping that Common Core would get back to when it first, you know, came out, when I didn't really know where it was going. And what we're seeing is absolutely the opposite. We're going to this workforce development where, if, you know, the kids are told to analyze, analyze, analyze. Analyze what? They don't have the foundation of knowledge to make that analysis. And, you know, and back to John's point about, you know, when he brought up, you know, that now he understands the importance of liberal arts. We are an exceptional nation. Is that even being taught? We have got to teach history. We've got to teach that America is exceptional, because if we don't, we run the risk of losing that someday. Why do we have a republic? Why is that? Why does that make us exceptional compared to the other countries that have tyranny? You know, that needs to be explained. It needs to be, you need to teach what the different forms of government are.
A lot of history isn't even being taught to the kids today.
And that's factually based
They're
information.
glossing over it.
Yes, and
Well,
we've got to teach that.
We also don't have history about American education.
Yes.
And that's part of the problem. I wanted to bring some of that up, but between John and Anne Marie, they brought up such good parts. I don't know where to go here. But I would like to just talk to John's point when he talked about Microsoft, because this relates very directly to teacher evaluations. And let me show you how. It's Bill Gates' movement here at how to do this kind of thing and evaluate teachers. And what happened, it's interesting to study what happened in Microsoft, in his company. His company has been in the doldrums for about the last 10 years. They haven't moved much and haven't done much, and they missed a lot of opportunities. So they have been sort of stagnated. And why? The analysis in that has been that they had a system that Gates put in called stacked ranking. And what they did is they had teams of 10 people. And in that 10 people, they were going to be evaluated every year, this team. The team was going to be evaluated on, excellent, good, fair, and not good. So you had actually the classical bell curve, which was imprinted on the team, which meant that at the top there, at the end, somebody had to be fired. And that was it was done. So the teams didn't work as teams. They worked competitive with each other, which in terms destroyed the nature of the company, the nature of innovation, the nature of creativity. And that's what brought down the company in the last 10 years and stagnated their growth. So that stacked ranking, which now Microsoft has dropped, they don't do it anymore, but the residue has come down to our schools, because that's what we're doing with teacher evaluation.
Wow.
This stacked ranking, and that's the genesis of the teacher evaluation, is this stacked ranking that was done at Microsoft, which they no longer do because of the same problems that they have, and Steve Ballmer leaving, and they can't get a CEO. They're having a hell of a time trying to replace Ballmer, because there are people who simply don't want the job.
Nobody wants
And
to
that
take over
says
the
something
reins.
about Microsoft, about Bill Gates. One guy, one person who has considered, I believe, said you'd have to get rid of Bill Gates and get him off the board before I would consider.
Really?
Wow.
And let me just say, for what it's worth, I'm not a Bill Gates hater. I made, for about 13 years, I made a living off of Microsoft products. Their database product, their programming languages, so thanks to Bill Gates, that's how I would not, if it wasn't for Windows and Microsoft, I wouldn't have been able to start my first company. So I'm not a Bill Gates basher, but by the same token,
You don't have to, I am.
we're starting. Well, we're starting to learn. As Sid said, some of the techniques that they used and the way they ran their business. We're starting to see what some of the long-term effects.
But bottom line is,
decisions.
Bill Gates was never an educator.
He wasn't.
He
and
was a great technical person. He had a great mind, but
And
he was
he's
never
been
an
quoted
educator.
for saying that we'll know if Common Core works in about 10 years.
Right.
He's said that.
Wow.
So this is a big experiment. You brought it up at the beginning of the show. This is a big experiment. And I think, John
And if
I-
it doesn't work, too late for the kids
Right.
who were 10 years in it.
And John brought, he talked about on another radio show about, and I think it's a great analysis of what's wrong with the Common Core standards, because he saw it with the curriculum that was being developed in the Manchester schools based on the Common Core standards. And I mean, he can explain it better than I can about like this emotional. They want kids to write emotionally, and maybe you can explain it a little bit
So
better.
they're supposed to
Yeah.
be very convincing, right? And
Right.
emotional,
Well,
their argument.
Yeah, as Anne-Marie said, there are a number of tenets of Common Core that I found disturbing. Real fundamental shifts in emphasis. She already talked about one of them, which is this shift away from knowledge and towards analysis. Another one I saw that was really disturbing is a focus on persuasive language. And what kids are being taught, they're being taught very deliberately and very effectively to use emotional words to convince, in order to get what they want, to convince people about an argument. It's essentially, they're teaching them to be activists, okay?
I was just going to
and-
say, it sounds like a lot of candidates.
That's that's
Speeches,
exactly
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Now, the reason this hit me immediately,
Yeah.
I recognized it immediately because I teach seminars on how to do this. I'm a web marketer, so I know all about using the 7 emotional words or emotional triggers that are very well known, especially among marketers, and there are specific words in each of those 7 categories. I've even got a cheat sheet that I use for writing blog posts and headlines and landing pages of these 7 emotional triggers and all the words that go along with them, and I use them every day as part of my job as a marketer. Now, I also remember, back to my own high school days, I did an entire, I think it was an entire semester of English in high school where we were taught logic. And we were taught logical fallacies, and throughout my entire high school education, I had points taken off for making emotional arguments instead of, you know, they would write on there, show facts, where are your facts, weak argument, logical fallacy. So where 20-something years ago when I was in high school, I would get points taken off for using logical fallacies as part of my
Instead of
writing.
solid information.
Right. Now the kids are being deliberately taught straw man arguments, false dichotomies. They're actually institutionally being taught to use logical fallacies in order to get what they want, in order to persuade other people to their point of view, which you know, I think is not just reprehensible, it's dangerous. You know, if we look at the discourse that goes on these days, the political discourse, not just among politicians. I hate to blame politicians because, in my opinion, they're an absolute and perfect reflection of us. Voters do exactly, politicians do exactly what the voters allow them to get away with.
And I don't like me.
Yeah. That's a good point.
But you see it.
Yeah.
I see it every day in Facebook, right?
Yeah.
You look at the political arguments that go on Facebook. They are very emotional. They are very logically flawed, and I think that that's what contributes to this. You know, a lot of the poisonous rhetoric that we have, not just in politics but with each other, and we're fueling that. We're now institutionalizing that as part of the education system. So, you know, you hear people pay lip service all the time, and they'll talk about how much they despise partisanship, right? Well, that's exactly what we're teaching as part of Common Core, is how to be an effective partisan.
Well, you know,
Wow.
I think we could be sidetracked in talking about taking little bits of the curriculum here and there, and even if we were to sit down and make out a curriculum, we'd have disagreements, probably, in what they are. I mean, curriculum is a value-laden exercise.
But this
So
is
we
a.
have-
I think that this persuasive argument, this is not a part of. It's not a curriculum lesson. It is a foundational element of Common Core
Right.
Yeah,
that you see throughout.
Right, and that's what I
In
think.
each subject area as well?
It's in math.
Well,
In math as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
yeah, so I think.
Wow.
The specific problem that I saw that caused me to raise my eyebrows in the first place was a math problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think when I heard John speak about it, it was on Rich Gerard's radio show. And
Gerard at Large.
Yeah, and
For those who haven't listened,
yeah,
they should, because he's done a lot of work
and
on
Rich
Common
has
Core.
brought up a great point that, you know, one of the exercises the kids were supposed to do is to persuade their parents so that they can get something. You know, and he you know, and he made the argument, why are we teaching our kids to you know, argue with their parents for an iPod that I've said no to, and now you're going to teach my kids to argue with
Come
me
home and
and,
argue with
and
me,
make this persuasive argument, and you know, so you could see the direction that it was going in, and you know, I wanted John to kind of hit on that, because when you talk about Common Core, you can look at the big picture, which I kind of covered with the workforce, but then it gets down to these little, you know, the more detailed parts of it. And big picture, I have a problem with it. Details, we have a problem with it. Nobody's ever discussed this. It's just being done in our schools, and there's been absolutely almost no public debate on this.
There really has not been. I mean, we can look at locally.
And now they're
Certainly
pushing
has
it.
not been.
They're pushing it. It's, you know, Sid brought you know, the information that the National Governors Association, if he wants to talk about that, issued and said, this is what we want you to tell the parents in order to sell this.
Yeah, I think
What is the handbook?
well, I think we have to have a few big ideas which people out there can remember and can you know, put their hands around, put their arms around. And one of the things I'd like to come back to is the skepticism thing and asking questions about it. And I think I had brought up the last meeting about the fact that this is led by this fellow David Coleman and a few other, four others of his colleagues, none of whom had any classroom experience at all. And a couple of months.
These were the original, what, Common Core authors?
Right.
Yes.
He was.
Okay.
He's the architect,
Okay.
the main architect that set this whole thing up. And this is his picture over here. But this is a speech. I did some research, and I got a speech that he did back in 2010 at the University of Pittsburgh, and at the it was a senior leadership meeting of the Institute for Learning. And he was the speaker, and he did, and I say this because at one point before the State Board of Education, I raised the issue that this is done by amateurs. This is led by amateurs.
Yes.
And, and I was challenged on that by the chair of the board, and said, Sid, I disagree with you. Well, obviously he didn't do his homework or didn't delve into this, because here by admission, let me see if oh, here, maybe here it is. I have to get my glasses out here. If I can find what, oh, here it is. He was the head of a group called Student Achievement Partners. And he said in the speech, he's saying he's trying to disarm this group of professionals. And he says, this Student Achievement Partners, all you need to know about us are a couple of things. One is we're composed of that collection of unqualified people who were involved in developing the common standards. And our only qualification was our attention to and command of the evidence behind them. And what evidence is he talking about?
Wow.
What they did in evidence was to take the international tests, look at which items are repeated again and again, and came up and said, well, then that's what we should do in math, because this is the 5 items that appear most frequently, and the ones that they're doing in Hong Kong and Singapore and in South Korea. So that's how we'll do it and how we got about it. So we're being led down the primrose path by a bunch of unqualified, inexperienced people who have by his own admission in 2010.
Right, and then then Common Core organization hires the 2 national renowned experts, Sandra Stotsky and James Milgram, who say, no, these standards are not internationally benchmarked, they're not appropriate, they're not, they're not even of the high quality that we would expect. And they, instead of listening to them, they just rejected what they said and said, we're going to go forward with this. This is what
now there are
give
people around the country trying to ridicule them, right here locally as well.
Right, right.
Well, as I said, good people, well-meaning people could disagree on some of the things in curriculum. They could do this. I mean, that's okay.
Sure.
Because I think teachers and parents should sit down together at the table and discuss this and what we want to do with our kids. But that has to be done on a local level if we're going to do anything like that.
Yeah,
but not somebody like this coming in and saying, this is what your kids need and your kids need because I said it.
And
No,
I think that we're in the situation we're in right now with Common Core because of something you mentioned about all of these legislators and school board members, frankly, not doing their homework.
They're not.
They just said they took the marketing tagline from Common Core and said, "Oh, sounds good."
Well, most legislators, though, didn't even know about it, did they? And a lot of I mean, that's why we're seeing so much going on in states. In fact, I guess
Well, and
Apparently, this just happened, and correct me if you can update me on this, but I was just reading about it this morning, that North Carolina is the latest state now to jump in and say, hey, we're putting the brakes on this, because what they've done is the legislature prohibited the North Carolina Board of Education excuse me, from spending any money on any new tests tied in any fashion with Common Core, including Smarter Balance,
Yes.
unless the legislature passes a specific law that says, okay, you can spend that money.
and that's very difficult
I mean, in
to
New
do.
Hampshire, a lot of legislators claim they never heard of
No,
it
Yeah.
they didn't.
until all this commotion started.
That's something that's very difficult to do because, you know, what you have to do is admit that you made a mistake.
Yep.
Or admit that we didn't read the bill before we signed it,
Yep.
or that we didn't do enough research. And, you know, most people are not willing to do that.
Well,
you know?
I think I'm more enraged with state boards of education and departments of education, and then the next level with local school boards, than I'm enraged at
Well, the state
legislators.
board,
Oh, yeah, I agree. And you know, I
Because
think
I think clearly these people have not done due diligence on this.
either that or they have an
they
agenda.
haven't done it. And,
Well,
and if
another
I-
point, yeah.
If I could just come in here for a moment and come back to really local to our State Board of Education right
yeah,
here and
please
give you
do.
some example. The Common Core came in I think 2010, 2009. They first finished with the Achieve just finished it. This is taken from July 8th, I believe it was, July 8th minutes of the State Board meeting of 2010. And I say that read this to you to give you some indication and reinforce the notion that we have done a series of blind acceptances. We have done blind at every level. We have done this, including the board level. This is a quote directly from the minutes that anybody can look up. You can find them anywhere you want on the New Hampshire State Board of Department of Education. This was, I'm not going to name the person who said it. The person is not on the board anymore. But this was in July 8th, 2010. It was June 2010. Now I got the date. So it's not even a
almost
month.
like- yeah,
It's not
getting
even
to
a
be
month
3 years
before they
ago.
were issued.
Yeah.
Here's what somebody on the New Hampshire State Board of Education said. The Common Core state standards in English language arts and mathematics focus on critical knowledge, skills, and capacities needed for success in the global economy. I can go off on that one. So, communicative expectations clearly and concisely to teachers, parents, students, so forth. Consider international benchmarks and ensure, this is the word that really gets me, is ensure. Ensure that the standards are aligned from the elementary to high school to post-secondary education so that students can be successful at each educational level.
Did this
Now,
board
here's
member
some of-
actually judge this? It sounds to me like they
This-
were copying off a promotional brochure
Right.
for
Well,
Common
yeah,
Core.
this is part of the propaganda that appears in what I brought along on the playbook here, the propaganda playbook.
I want
But
you
what
to
I'm
talk
saying-
about that, because I don't
Well,
even think a lot of people know that exists.
Well, I want you to give you some dates here. This
Yeah,
was
yeah.
June 2010. It was released, and here in July 8th, 2010, a member of our state board makes this kind of thing. The person couldn't. I don't want to get mixed up in a pronoun here because but couldn't have time to read it, analyze it,
No.
digest
In a
it,
month?
look at it. But this is a
Research it,
person
yeah.
which shows you the blind acceptance,
yeah.
falling in line. We'll accept anything you send us. It doesn't matter if I analyze it or take care of it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Now, that's no way to educate children. We can't educate kids like that. We can't have a school system like that. That's really depriving it. And what does it say about democracy?
Mm-hmm.
What does it say about our democracy? It's shabby. It's terrible to have something like this, and without question, only one person, and it was the chair at the time.
Yep.
It was the one person, the chair at the time. You probably know.
Who was the chair?
John
John
Lyons.
Lyons.
Okay.
The only person that I know that's in the minutes that said, "What's wrong with our New Hampshire standards? They seem to be working very well. Why are we doing this?" but there's nothing in the minutes that indicate that there was a discussion about this, or
Wow.
that we thrashed it through and we discussed the topic. It was completely eliminated. It was chopped off. His comment was chopped off. It ended. It wasn't discussed any further. Those are the issues that I believe people should know about to understand the flow of the current here and where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's really
Well,
important.
at the beginning I said it's coming 1,000 miles an hour, and it is.
And the information that's now being released that you
Well,
brought,
here, yeah.
that I think is important
I
too.
have never in all my years had a scene, or I don't think it was ever done, a book. This is really a propaganda playbook, and it's out of, well, I don't want to use that word, but it's out of a totalitarian kind of thinking.
And this is being given
And
to whom? Teachers?
This is given to teachers,
To
and
teachers.
to administrators and boards of education on how they should handle and communicate to the public. Can you imagine that they're
And who's
telling?
that? Is that from the National Governors Association?
Yep.
Well,
This
no,
is-
that's
So how it has to be
This
sold
is-
to us, rather than saying, here's what Common Core is, and here's, we have some criticisms, and here's the information. We're going to let you states decide on whether you want to accept this or not, whether you want to go down this path, or whether you want to improve the standards. Now, I will say this: I did send an email to the chairman of the National Board of Education, because I said, districts like Manchester and Alton have said no to Common Core. They did their due diligence because the public came out and said, this is not what we want. And they're going to look at developing their own standards. So I sent an email to Chairman Raffio on the Board of Education. I said, can you clarify for me, is this something the board supports? Because a couple people are saying, the board is not supporting something like this. But I don't like to go on hearsay. So I asked him myself, and I said, please clarify for me. And he did email me back and said the board does support any school districts that seeks to improve their standards. So what we have here essentially is we have a set of mediocre standards that are extremely problematic, that are not internationally benchmarked to the highest performing countries, and this is what the Board of Education has given to the schools in New Hampshire. And now we have a couple school districts that have said, you know what, we're going to do something better. Now the question is, why is this even debated? Why is this a debatable subject now? To me, this should end the debate. This should be something that we all gather around our school districts and say, you know what, we want it locally controlled. We want our school administrators, our teachers, and the parents of the community to sit down and really look. And we're hoping that this is what Manchester and Alton does do in the long run. And that's where I'm not hearing enough from the Board of Education and from the governor and from the commissioner that that's what really should be done. It's instead, we're getting this. We're getting sell Common Core, sell Common Core, sell Common Core. Why are we selling something that we all know is problematic and mediocre at best?
Well,
I'm going to
I
look.
wish we all knew that. That the problem is that
Yeah.
we don't all know that. I wish
Yeah.
they did. And one of the reasons we're here today, I hope, is to
Yeah.
pass the information
one of the
along.
things I'm concerned about on the practical side of things is we can't go more than another 5 minutes.
No.
And this subject is so huge. I mean,
That's right.
it's like every time we open a door, there are, 25 little boxes behind each door, each one with some concern
I
of
have
Common
a lot
Core.
more on my lesson plans.
I can see. So now that we're down to under 5 minutes, I guess what I want to do is this. And again, we can do another show. I told you there's no limit to how many shows I'm willing to do on Common Core and with repeat guests who have a lot of knowledge. I guess what I'd ask each of you to do, and be very mindful, and you can watch that clock up there to time yourselves, or I'm going to come over and shake you, is this. Each of you now advise those people who are watching, whether they're parents of kids in the schools or not, tell them what right now they need to be getting on the phone to do with legislators, with school board members, with their local school superintendents. What is the message or multiple messages that they should be picking up the phone and talking about right now? Because we've got to do something. We can't just sit back and let this engine keep racing down the track at the rate it's going. So,
Okay.
who wants to start? You want to go first?
Well, I would say
You've got
that
about 1 minute each.
sure, parents have a lot more power than they think. And we've seen it in Manchester and Alton, where parents showed up at the school board meetings and said, we want something better. We've looked at this, we don't like this, we want something better. So parents are standing up. I think we're going to see that more from the teachers as they start administering the Smarter Balance test, which is extremely flawed. And I would not want my children taking the test, and I wouldn't want my teachers judged on this test or my school district judged on this test. And for any kind of evidence of that, all you have to do is look at, he's a school board member in Nashua, David Murataki, wrote a testimony to the Joint Legislative Commission that is going to be looking at the new Hampshire rules that are coming
I
on the
read
Board
that.
of
He's good.
Education.
He's good.
He went to his teachers after they were administering the Smarter Balance test, and the teachers are absolutely appalled at what they're seeing, these questions on this test. That CPAs are having difficulty figuring it out. You know, some of the teachers, I would suggest reading his testimony, first of all, because this is what these teachers are going to be evaluated. This is what your district's going to be evaluated on. This is what your children are going to be evaluated on. Parents need to get involved, and I'm hoping that more teachers will come out and start speaking out and saying, we have a serious problem here. And when that happens, the local communities really need to take back that power and decide for themselves what standards and what tests they're going to be using. And when that happens, I think we're going to see some real changes, some positive changes, and it can be done.
Okay, John.
I would say, just quickly to add to that, encourage parents to talk to the teachers. When I did that very deliberately at some of the open houses earlier this year at my kids' school, I got a wide range of reaction, and not a few of them were very obviously rolling eyeballs, shrugging shoulders. They were not on board, to say the least. So I think get yourself educated on Common Core. Talk to the teachers, let them know you're on their side, that you think this is bad for teachers, and that's one of the reasons you're speaking out against it.
And you have
I have
about 1 minute, and you've got to talk as fast as you can.
3,000 questions, right? I would offer the encouragement for parents to go in and ask one question to the school boards and to teachers and to administrators, and that's say, in this era of accountability that we're smothered with, which is, well, not bad, but this era of accountability, you're accountable to us, the community, to demonstrate and tell us why the Common Core curriculum is better than the New Hampshire standards we had before. So I'd like you to take item by item and go through and tell us why it's better. And let's go through it logically, consistently, slowly, but it's your responsibility as a local board to demonstrate that to us.
Great ending.
And that's
I've got to stop you. Sorry.
Okay.
This is what happens when you get great people talking about a big subject. I think it's safe to say these folks will be back for another show. And any of you watching, feel free to email me with any questions or any issues you'd like them or other Common Core guests to address. We are so out of time. Thank you for watching. We will continue this. There'll be some other shows, too, on other subjects, but we'll keep on trudging along with Common Core. Thank you for watching, and again, if you have comments or questions, email them to me, and we'll get them answered. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. Happy New Year.